You ever notice how the most profound parenting advice sounds almost too simple to work? Fred Rogers once fielded the ultimate question, how do you actually raise kids, right? And his answer wasn't a 12-step program or a best-selling book. Imagine you're standing in your living room, watching your 4-year-old have a complete meltdown over the wrong color sippy cup. You've got two choices here. You can pull out the discipline playbook, or you can do something that feels almost radical in its simplicity. What if the secret to connecting with your kid isn't in some expert's manual? What if it's buried somewhere in your own childhood, collecting dust like an old yearbook you haven't opened in decades? Rogers had this wild idea that adults walking around today were once small humans with the exact same big feelings. Shocking revelation, right? But here's where it gets interesting. We forget that part completely. Think about it. You were once the kid freaking out over seemingly nothing. You were the one who thought the world might actually end because your toast was cut into squares instead of triangles. But somewhere between then and now, we cross this invisible line. We become the adults, the decision makers, the ones who are supposed to have it all figured out. And in that transformation, we conveniently erase the emotional rawness of being small. Rogers saw through that illusion immediately. His advice wasn't to read another parenting book or attend another workshop. It was to become an archaeologist of your own past. Here's the mechanism he proposed. And it's almost absurdly straightforward. Look at your child. Really look at them. In the moment they're struggling or celebrating or just existing, then flip the script entirely. Use them as a mirror pointing backward in time. See yourself in their confusion, their wonder, their disproportionate reactions to life's tiny catastrophes. The engineering behind this is deceptively simple, but wildly effective. Your kid becomes the key that unlocks memories you didn't even know you'd filed away. Their tantrum suddenly connects to that time you cried because your favorite stuffed animal went through the wash. Now suddenly you're not dealing with an irrational tiny human anymore. You're dealing with a person whose emotional experience you intimately understand because you lived it. The empathy doesn't have to be manufactured. It's already there, just dormant. But here's where modern parenting culture throws us a curveball. We're told to be the authority, the boundary setter, the rational adult in the room. All valid, sure, but Rogers is asking for something that seems to contradict that entirely. He's suggesting we temporarily abandon our adult perspective and crawl back into the mindset of someone who believes monsters live under the bed. Someone for whom waiting 5 minutes genuinely feels like an eternity. Someone who hasn't yet learned that most problems are actually pretty small. The irony? This backwards glance doesn't make you less effective as a parent. It makes you exponentially more connected. Because you're not just enforcing rules from some elevated position, you're remembering why those rules feel impossible to a kid. Critics of this approach might say you're coddling, that kids need structure, not sympathy. But Rogers wasn't advocating for chaos. He was advocating for understanding as the foundation beneath the structure. And here's what's wild about memory as a tool. It's not static. The act of remembering your childhood while watching your child actually changes how you remember it. Your kids' experiences literally reshape your understanding of your own past. So what happens when parents actually try this? The transformation isn't always dramatic or immediate, but over time, the constant excavation of childhood memory creates something like a bridge. On one side, there's your child living in real-time confusion and discovery. On the other side, there's you with all your adult context and experience. And memory becomes the thing that lets you actually meet in the middle. The persistence of Rogers' advice decades later tells you something important. In an age of hyper-specialized parenting strategies and conflicting expert opinions, the simplest wisdom still cuts through. Remember what it felt like. That's it. That's the whole trick. But the question that lingers is almost uncomfortable in its simplicity. If reconnecting with your own childhood is the key to raising kids well, why do so many of us resist it? Maybe because remembering how vulnerable we once were means admitting we're not as far from that vulnerability as we'd like to think. The game Rogers was playing wasn't really about nostalgia or sentimentality. It was about using the past as a practical tool for present-day connection. Your childhood isn't just history, it's a resource, sitting there waiting to be useful again. And here's the kicker that nobody really talks about. When you look at your child and see yourself, you're not just becoming a better parent. You're actually recovering parts of yourself that got buried under years of being told to grow up and get serious. So the circle completes itself in this strange way. Your child helps you parent them better by accidentally reminding you who you used to be. They're teaching you by simply existing exactly as they are. That's the lasting genius of what Rogers understood. Parenting isn't a one-way transmission of wisdom from experienced adult to clueless child. It's this weird, reciprocal exchange where both people end up changed. Your kid grows up, and you somehow grow backwards and forwards at the same time. The story continues every single day in homes everywhere. Parents trying to remember, kids unknowingly serving as time machines, and Fred Rogers smiling somewhere, knowing his simplest advice might actually be his most revolutionary. But whether anyone's really listening well, that's the question that makes this whole thing worth thinking about.